Happy Friday. Welcome to the 3 Things I Learned, SaaS, sports, tech, and live events. This week, we're going to talk about what we learned in reading 164 books about business leadership and psychology. So some background. Back in 2004, I had a mentor who was helping me with my career. Now that mentor knew that a young kid at the time wasn't going to give up all of the time with friends and surfing and doing the things that we did outside of work hours. So this mentor helped me by suggesting I read 2 to 4 books a month. Now, some months I read 0, some months I read 4, just depending on where we were in our lives. Now I try to stick to the 2 to 3, and we do read here as a business as well. We read 164 books. These are the 5 that we see as the most impactful that we would suggest to others who are starting a career in leadership or in business. Now, these are not deep tracks. If we want to talk deep tracks, we can certainly do that offline. But these are the 5 that we've seen as the most helpful, and we hope you enjoy them. Book number 1 is Thinking Fast and Slow. It was given to me as a gift, and I didn't read it for 4 years as it seemed like it was too much of a textbook. Now, you've probably heard of this book. The author, Daniel Kahneman, won a Nobel Prize for the work that he and Amos Tversky did in creating behavioral economics. The premise of this book is very simple. We have subconscious bias, and that means bias that we don't know. Everybody always argues about bias, especially today, but subconscious means you're not aware of it. That helps us drive decisions when we're thinking fast and when we're thinking slow. This book will really help the reader understand why we think the way we do, how that leads us to errors, and how we can better understand our business going forward without those biases that are built in. Now, if Thinking Fast and Slow reads too much like a textbook for the reader, there is another book called The Undoing Project by Michael Lewis, the writer of Moneyball and The Big Short, who tells the story of Kahneman and Tversky and how they built behavioral economics while also sprinkling in a lot of what one would learn in Thinking Fast and Slow. I believe this book should be required reading in schools, especially at the high school level. Please enjoy it. It will change the way you see the decisions that you're making, but also it'll change the way you see the decisions that your team, partners, customers are making, and see that maybe things aren't as nefarious as they might seem. That's number 1. Our second book is How Champions Think by Bob Rotella. So we have been inundated in the last 30 years by pop psychologists talking about positivity or motivation or whatever else that's out there. You have, especially in the TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook era, we all see those clips every single day, and I've read all of those books. Now, Rotella's a little bit different. Rotella is a performance coach who works with majority of the major superstars on the PGA Tour and a number of major athletes, and he's been doing so from university for 30 years. Now, the difference is Rotella has a lot of practical examples of exactly how we can practice and how we can do things that would lead to us being in a position that we're prepared for high pressure situations and we can perform in those. It's very practical, and his track record is incredibly impressive. So the second book that we suggest, which is wildly popular with our revenue team here, is How Champions Think by Bob Rotella. Book number 3 is Emotional Agility by Susan David. You may recognize the name as she has a TED Talk that went viral a couple of years ago. Now, why I love this book is, again, there's a lot of pop psychology out there that talks about us being positive all the time and working with everybody in that way, and that's all great, and there are a lot of depth to that. Emotional agility is a little bit different. Susan gives us practical ways that we can work with our team and staff as we go through things in life, as we're agile through the different seasons of life. And you are going to go through this when you're leading a team. You're going to have people who go through grief. You're going to have people who go through loss, who go through exuberance, who go through a number of different things. And the idea is how we can bring those all together as a team and work. I had the opportunity to have lunch with Susan one time at one of these leadership conferences we went to, and her EQ is absolutely off the charts. I am so grateful for this book, and it is a must read for anybody that's going to lead a team that wants that team to be able to bring themselves to work in their career. That's Emotional Agility by Susan David. The fourth book we've talked about quite a bit here, and it's The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. Now, we read a ton of business books that are out there. Jack Straight from the Gut, and Schwartzman's book, and Branson's book, and Phil Knight's book, and all of them, right? Now, this book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, is by far the most practical book we've read. Horowitz does a wonderful job of breaking down how one would address situations in businesses of all sizes. Now, we read this book, I think about 4 or 5 years after we started TicketManager. Had we read this book before we started TicketManager, we would have saved millions of dollars. And that's not hyperbole. We also would have saved ourselves a lot of heartache. I'm super thankful for Horowitz's book, and it is an absolute must read for anybody that's in a leadership position in a growth business or in entrepreneurship. That's The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. Finally, Influence by Robert Cialdini, written in 1984. It was not a hit when it first came out, and now it's risen to prominence. Influence is where the author breaks down the 6 principles of how one can influence somebody else. Now, when you read these principles, they come across as really obvious, right? You almost feel like I don't need to read the rest of this chapter, but then when you put the 6 of them together, you can see how they're weaponized in commerce, politics, business, and social circles around us in our world at all times. If you are leading a team, if you are trying to influence investors or customers or partners, this is an absolute must read. Stick with it through the whole book, because as you put those 6 things together, they make sense. Now, as an added bonus, there is one article which we've mentioned here a lot that we would highly suggest to any entrepreneur, and that's The Sure Thing by Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote it in 2010 for The New Yorker before he came to prominence in his authorship career about some of the books that he has out there. It is by far the best explanation of entrepreneurs and risk that I've read, and I very highly recommend it for anybody that is going into high growth leadership or entrepreneurship business. I hope these 5 books help you, and they can act as a cheat code that will save you countless hours and countless millions, as they would have for us had we read them earlier. I'm always looking for more great books to read, so please share them. And obviously, if you want to talk some of the deep tracks, we can do that too. That's it for this week on The 3 Things. We'll see everybody next week.